Hi guys, it's Amy. Welcome to Strength Reversed. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to do a VR today to Anna from Astral Lady Tarot. She has a video called hashtag main decks and hashtag mood decks. And I'm going to go through the decks that I consider to be my main decks and then the ones that I consider to be my kind of decks on the periphery, the ones that I only go to on certain occasions. And Anna talked about how a main deck gets its status and if there is such a thing as a perfect deck. And like people, I don't think that there is a perfect deck. Even my go-to deck, my favorite deck of all time, is not perfect, but it is perfect for me. You know, it's like people. Your friends, your loved ones, they're not perfect, but they work for you. Hopefully. You know, it's like a mate. You will never find anyone perfect, but if they're right for you, you can see past the minor flaws. And so that to me is what a main deck is. And Anna talked about being able to picture all 78 cards. And I do think my main decks are decks where I've just used them so much and they're so versatile that if I have to picture a card, it will be from one of those decks. They're just somehow, the images are internalized and they're just part of my psyche, my unconscious, my subconscious, whatever. Okay, one of the consciouses. So I will talk to you, first of all, about my main decks. Now, my first main deck, of course, is the Robin Wood. And I thought about, is this a perfect deck? I don't think it's perfect. A lot of people probably could take or leave this deck. And I can understand that. But I think the reason why it's so good for me is that it was my first deck. It's the deck that I learned with. And so for me, it's the gold standard. And everything else is compared to this deck. When I visualize a card, I visualize it from the Robin Wood. And when I get a new deck, I look at the card and think, is this better or not as good as the Robin Wood version of that card? Because for me, it's just mine. These images are so ingrained. They're tattooed in my brain. And so I love this deck. I don't know what to say. At this point, I can't even tell you why I love this deck. But I like the colors. You know, I really at first did not like any of the Rider-Waite decks. I just didn't like the kind of yellowish tinge, the yellow hues to all the cards. And I thought some of the cards were not very pretty. And then this came along with its bright colors. And so for me, this is a main deck because, oh, there's the bush. That matches Julie. I don't know what Julie's talking about with the... Okay, that might be one of the flaws. I don't even see people's junk in this deck anymore. But Julie said, I mean, this is a good example. For me, this is the, fire penis card. For me, this deck just speaks to me. And for some people, like Juliet Peekaboo Rose said, she can't get past some of the nudity in the cards, that it's distracting. And I can totally see that. I totally can get that. And there might be some days when I go, you know what? I don't need to see that guy's thing hanging out. But, most days I don't even notice. So I think what for me makes a main deck is it's a deck that is just so familiar that it speaks to me no matter what the question. These are decks that I would use to read for other people with because I know I'm not going to get hung up on a card. I know they're going to talk. And they're very versatile and flexible, and it doesn't matter if it's a serious reading, if it's lighthearted, if it's about love, if it's about career, if it's about, past lives, or, should I buy this car or this car? It doesn't matter what kind of reading it is, I know one of my main decks is completely going to get the job done, and I trust it. So first of all, Robin Wood. Second of all is pretty much any of the Rider-Waite decks. Okay, I mean, I just ugh on the back. But of course, I'm not looking at the back. So any Rider-Waite, whether it's just the standard Rider-Waite Smith, ye old Rider-Waite, I call it, the Universal Weight, which I got to read for at the medieval fair, just because I liked the backs a lot better and I liked the coloring a lot better. But the images of any of these decks really speaks to me. Here's the Radiant Wise Spirit. I got this one because I really wanted a borderless. And these are just the familiar images. There are so many flavors of Rider-Waite, and they all, you know, if you're familiar with the Rider-Waite system, you can unbox them and go. You don't have to study up on anything. This is my purse deck. It's a cheapy knockoff, uber cheap Halloween store version. And this one I pretty much use every day because it travels with me, and I pull most of my cards of the day from this one. So any RWS standard is gonna be a main deck of mine. Any version of Rider-Waite that I get, I know is gonna go into my rotation of main decks. And probably the next main deck is my Lightseers, which was unexpected because it was a gift. And, you know, I think this became a main deck for a lot of people. Or at least it was, you know, well loved by a lot of people. I love the colors. I love that it's a little bit more modern, but it's still super, why are these all reversed? I'll have to reset this. It's still super accessible. It's pretty. And it's just kind of a new twist. But I know that it's going to give me a good reading no matter what question I come to with it. So the decks that I would call my mood decks. Now, I'm not someone who comes to the tarot. I don't pick decks based on topic. So I don't have a deck that's like, this is good for relationship questions, or this is good for career questions. I really just go with what pops into my head. If there's a deck that kind of, if I'm thinking, okay, I have to do a reading for this person, and a deck sort of pops out at me, or I keep thinking about it, I'll just go with that deck. And that's how I choose my mood decks. One of them is the Tarot of the Weird. And I've had this deck forever, and I love it. It is kind of gothic-y, Victorian-y, and it is a little different. But I use this a lot of times when I journal. Not only for past life readings, but I do feel kind of an old connection to this deck. And so this deck I rarely use to read for other people. There's a certain guide and a certain aspect of myself that really connects to this deck. And so that's what this deck is used for. Not exactly a mood, but a specific task. I have found, this is one of my newest decks, but I have found that my Titanic Tarot is really, I just love that. I love that. It's really good for deep questions. This could be like really heavy emotional questions. It's a super watery deck, and it has that bright indigo color, which I love. I feel like this deck, I have not interviewed it, but I feel like this is a very honest deck. I feel like it's a caring deck. It doesn't really pull punches. It will be very honest, but it's also somehow gentle. Like it knows that life's a bitch. You know, there are maybe some bad days and it's difficult to deal with, but I do feel like it's also a hopeful deck. You know, if I wanted to find the silver lining, this might be a deck I would go to. So sometimes I feel like this is going to be a deep reading, and if it's emotional, that might be good. Now, sometimes I get pulled to the Santa Muerte, and I get pulled to this deck a lot of times when I'm mad, just because I find it a little bit, it helps me put things in perspective. I find it a little bit humorous, and nothing is sacred unless you can laugh at it. And so it's kind of serious, but kind of, I think if you can't, humor is just it's a sacred part of anything. Everything can't be so serious. And it just reminds me that, shit happens and life goes on, and probably it's not that big of a deal, but it does take you seriously. It's not going to tell you to get over it. And, I feel better when I look at this deck. Ooh, that's pretty. Okay. Another deck that I'm sometimes called to is my Japaridze Tarot. When would I be called to this deck? I think when sometimes I just want a different perspective. I just think, let me see what that deck says. I always see something new. Oops, that's just the title cards. I don't really know what to say about the mood of my mood when I get called to this deck. It just is. Another one is Tarot of a Moon Garden, and sometimes this would be a deck I would be called to just to spice things up if I'm feeling a little bored, or it's one of those decks that I go, there's a hair in there, that I go, I haven't used that in a while, and I kind of forget how fun and cute it is. Oh, my son's home. Hold on. And then this is my Mystical Cats. And this one, sometimes the last time I pulled it out, I just had a feeling that I was doing live readings, and sure enough, someone asked a question about their pet. And I didn't know there was a dog one. I learned that on Lisa's channel, Lisa Pepez's channel. I'm not a dog person really, but anyway. Okay, so those are my main decks and mood decks, and I do have other decks that once in a while will call to me, but for the most part, these are the ones I reach for again and again. So thanks for watching. Make sure you like or subscribe, and I will be looking out for your responses. Thanks, guys.